If I am to regard myself as a teacher, then my teaching has changed. For quite a long time now, a decade or more, the main focus of my investigations and my teaching as a result has been the difference, or the differences, between Ouspensky's teaching and Gurdjieff's teaching. And these are two completely different teachings. And this is possible for me, and this has been possible for me, because Ouspensky's book, In Search of the Miraculous, was published in 1950. It was not available to Ouspensky's pupils, generally speaking, during Ouspensky's life. Ouspensky died in 1947 in London, and his book In Search of the Miraculous, describing his time as a pupil of Gurdjieff, was published posthumously in 1950. So we can read this book. In a similar way, Gurdjieff died in 1949, and his book, Beelzebub's Tales to His Grandson, was published posthumously in 1950. Before that, Gurdjieff's pupils, generally speaking, could not read this book and did not know what Gurdjieff was teaching. But both these books, and this is what I want to point out to you, both these books were published. Anyone could buy them. Anyone could walk off the street, buy these books and read them, and would know what Ouspensky was teaching from the book In Search of the Miraculous, and would know what Gurdjieff was teaching from the book Beelzebub's Tales to His Grandson. So this is completely distinct from anything that has gone previously, anything before 1950. Because I think before that, Gurdjieff's teaching was imbued with an aura of mystery. Gurdjieff came from the East. He gathered the knowledge from schools and monasteries in the East, brought it to the West. And yet, from 1950 onwards, we can buy Gurdjieff's book because it's been published, and we can open it at the first chapter, and almost the first thing Gurdjieff says in this first chapter is, "In my opinion." And then a few pages later, "In my opinion." And a few pages later, "In my opinion." So this is not some mysterious teaching from the East that is being expounded. So this aura of mystery, there can be an illusion of mystery. That is, it creates the illusion that there is some mystery where there is no mystery. There is no mystery about Gurdjieff's teaching because it is written down in a book. And there is no mystery about Ouspensky's teaching because it's written down in a book. So if we study the books, we can know the teaching. Now there are those centered, based thinking upon the period before 1950, when these books were not published. And then there was this aura of mystery about Gurdjieff's teaching and about Ouspensky. And this marvellous story that Ouspensky expounds in Search of the Miraculous of his time as a pupil of Gurdjieff. And it contains a mystery. Where did Gurdjieff discover this knowledge? Where did this knowledge come from? Where had Gurdjieff been? What was Gurdjieff really teaching? And there are those who, in terms of what they call, in fact, lineages, are perpetuating this idea that there is something mysterious in Gurdjieff's teaching and something mysterious in this whole area. What was Gurdjieff teaching? But since 1950, when Ouspensky's book In Search of the Miraculous was published, and when Gurdjieff's book Beelzebub's Tales to His Grandson was published, there is no mystery. You just read the books and you know what they were teaching because they've written it down in a book. So a lot of my teaching has been to compare, in a sense, these two books, to compare these two teachings as presented in these two books. And the conclusion that I quickly reached, and I have justified again and again and again, ad nauseam, as you know, I've justified saying that there are two completely different teachings associated with the name of Gurdjieff. There is the Gurdjieff tradition, predominantly coming in terms of lineages from the period before 1950, pre-publication Gurdjieff, pre-publication Ouspensky. And this is the Gurdjieff tradition. But it predominantly comes from Ouspensky, because Gurdjieff actually didn't teach very much and didn't teach many people, whereas Ouspensky did. So there is the Gurdjieff tradition coming from Ouspensky, completely different from Gurdjieff's own teaching, which since 1950 we can read Gurdjieff's book and there it is in the book, a teaching. Now, having compared these two teachings and shown that they are completely different, then it's possible to move on, because now I can start to look at Gurdjieff's own book, Beelzebub's Tales to His Grandson, with a view to actually explaining clearly and as simply as possible, and in a, I hope, a useful manner, just explaining what it is that Gurdjieff is saying in this book. Because it's there in the book, it's not complex, it's not a mystery. Now, I can also say in this context, this is what I was thinking about earlier, which prompted me to speak in this way. I was thinking about, if we take a philosopher, any sort of philosopher that you know, let's take Kierkegaard, the Dutch, was he Dutch philosopher? An existentialist philosopher, Kierkegaard. Then he wrote down his philosophy in a book. And there are people who study these books, philosophers. And there are people who comment upon these writings of Kierkegaard. And I will say, I may be wrong here, but my estimation is there are not many people passionately interested in the philosophical writings of Kierkegaard. There are some. And there are those who study this at university because it's part of their course. But essentially, it's a teaching, it exists, it's written down in a book, there it is. Now, is Gurdjieff's teaching the same as this? Because when we look at Gurdjieff's teaching, the first thing we encounter in chapter 1, which is from Gurdjieff himself, we encounter this expression, in my opinion. And a few pages later, in my opinion. And a few pages later, in my opinion. So is Gurdjieff's writings any more significant? First of all, it's not mysterious in any way because it's written down and it's published and you can buy it and read it. There it is. There's Gurdjieff's teaching. It's not a mystery. There's no mystery anymore. This went a long time ago. So it is a teaching, but it is a teaching that's written down and it is worthy of analysis because it is presenting completely new concepts to us that we didn't have before. Equally, Ouspensky has clearly understood from Gurdjieff a considerable amount and has written it down, certain aspects of it. I'm thinking here of the table of hydrogen as coming from the ray of creation, which is not in Gurdjieff's writings, and the two food diagrams that Ouspensky gives, which again are not in Gurdjieff's writings. These are incredibly valuable and extraordinary documents. So I think what I'm saying is that the emphasis in my teaching is now less upon a comparison between Ouspensky's teaching and Gurdjieff's teaching, which I suggest to you is very, very valuable for you to do. This is what you should be doing. First of all, compare the book In Search of the Miraculous with the book Beelzebub's Tales to His Grandson. Compare what Ouspensky wrote and taught with what Gurdjieff wrote and taught. And in this way, you start to grasp some of the major issues in this area. But I think what I'm here saying is that the idea behind Gurdjieff's, the Gurdjieff tradition, which comes from the era of lineages, coming from pre-1950 teachings, is no longer valid. So that I am the teacher, in fact, who is in a sense saying, look, this doesn't hold water. What you're saying, your pre-1950 lineages, what you are teaching as a Gurdjieff tradition, just does not hold water. Because it's not what Gurdjieff wrote. There's no mystery in Gurdjieff's teaching. It's written down in a book. If we examine and study the book very exactly, everything in it very exactly, word for word, then we arrive at Gurdjieff's teaching. It's not a mystery, but it is extraordinary. And that's the significance of Gurdjieff. This is an extraordinary teaching that contains so many elements that have never, as far as I know, existed before. And we can take them on board because Gurdjieff has written them down. You can buy the book, and if you buy the book, you can also read the book, and you can take on board these extraordinary ideas. So that's the slight change in my teaching at present. Now, of course, you will ask, what was Gurdjieff therefore teaching? As with other writers, as with other thinkers, as with other philosophers, as with other important people of ideas, we need a way into what they were actually teaching. And Gurdjieff's teaching is quite straightforward, although I think it is unique. And it says that in his opinion, in Gurdjieff's opinion, in the course of our life as human beings, there should take place a transformation. A change should take place in the course of our life, but it doesn't. Now, this is, I think, a unique idea. I've not heard it anywhere before, that there should take place a transformation. And the nature of the transformation, Gurdjieff says, is that in fact, early in our life, we establish in ourselves two conscious minds, having nothing in common. And in a sense, we end up living in the wrong one. We live our lives in a false self, a false conscious mind, in fact at a lower level than we actually exist, than we actually are. And in a state of consciousness, generally speaking, the Gurdjieff defined to Ouspensky as waking sleep. It's not a true state of consciousness. It's a facsimile of consciousness, which we take as if it is a true state of consciousness. So we're in this rather sorry situation, living our lives on earth, to put it grandly, because we establish this false conscious mind in ourselves, and that's what we live in. Now, Gurdjieff is saying that our true conscious mind remains in us, but in an isolated state. And there should take place in the course of our life a transformation. That is to say, this true conscious mind should develop in us, shall we say, in the background, and come eventually to predominate in us, to come, in a sense, to take over and our false little conscious mind that we've lived our lives in should revert to its proper position, its subordinate role as a secondary part of our psychology. It has its role in terms of our psychology. It assumes a predominant position in us, quite wrongly, to create a false self. But once our true conscious mind comes in the course of time to predominate in us, this little false self that we are now reverts back to its original and correct subordinate role. Now, once this transformation has taken place, we are presumably fairly elderly, but at that point we then have the possibility of some sort of individual development of our own choosing, that is to say, not chosen by a false self which has returned to its subordinate role, but actually chosen by our true conscious mind, our true self, which now predominates in us. So we have the possibility of some sort of individual development. This is Gurdjieff's opinion. This is what should happen during our lives. But Gurdjieff is saying and pointing out again and again that this does not happen. Gurdjieff's teaching is therefore, in terms of his writing Beelzebub's Tales to his grandson, for example, it is written to try to ensure that this transformation, which should take place in the course of our life, does take place in the course of our life. And this will change everything. So that's Gurdjieff's teaching. I don't think anyone else, I've not come across this idea anywhere else, that in the course of our life a change should take place, a transformation should take place. This is the whole point and purpose of that life, that this transformation should take place. So this is Gurdjieff's opinion, and this is what he was teaching. Now we can further augment this by adding a few details. First of all, it's quite clear that as far as the ordinary man is concerned, living in this false self, the reason for this is that we have things that we have to do. We have tasks, as it were, the things we have to do in terms of our own life. These relate to perhaps to us or to other people. There is a plan that we have to adhere to, we have to fulfill, and by that means pay the debt of our existence, as it were. So that's one little detail. There is a reason why we are in a false self, so that we can perform the tasks that we are here to perform in relation to ourselves and other people, and by this means we pay the debt of our existence if we complete those tasks. But once we've done that, once that is over, then what should happen, according to Gurdjieff, is that our true conscious mind should by then predominate in us. The transformation should have taken place, and we then have the choice as individuals, being ourselves, living in our true conscious mind. We have a free choice as individuals as to how we then develop, which as a free choice did not exist before, because we had tasks to fulfill. So this is, in my opinion, a unique teaching. It's a very interesting teaching, a very strange teaching, which increasingly, the more we understand it, the more we explore it, the more we experiment with it, the more we realise that it does hold water. This is a very, very important teaching. But of course, if I go back to my original position, my original role, comparing the Gurdjieff tradition, essentially coming from pre-publication Gurdjieff and Ouspensky's teaching, pre-1950 lineages, then my original position was comparing this Gurdjieff tradition with what Gurdjieff actually wrote, and of course there's no comparison at all. The Gurdjieff tradition is completely different. So it's quite difficult, I think, for those in that Gurdjieff tradition to even begin to understand what Gurdjieff was actually teaching, what Gurdjieff is actually teaching, what Gurdjieff's book, Beelzebub's Tales to His Grandson, is saying, and what it is about. So this becomes a role that I can perhaps take on.